was a chilly autumn morning when Officer Nathan Cole stepped out of his pickup truck, clutching a faded photograph in his weathered hand, the kind you keep in a drawer long after the moment it captured has passed. In it, he stood in uniform with a sable-colored German shepherd by his side, alert, proud, full of energy, ears perked, and eyes focused like he was always waiting for a command, always ready to leap into danger without hesitation, because that was Rex, K9 Unit 421, his partner for 6 years and a legend in the precinct, known not just for the arrests they made or the lives they saved, but for the silent bond they shared in every moment, spoken or not. Rex had once taken down a carjacker without a signal, sniffed out a kidnapped child under 19 hours of rubble, and even shielded Nathan from a suspect wielding a knife, bit deep in the shoulder, but never making a sound until the threat was gone. And even then, he licked Nathan's hand while they waited for help to arrive, his blood mixing with his partner's like some kind of solemn oath. But that was years ago now, before the arthritis set in, before the vet said it was time to retire him, before Nathan, under departmental pressure and a broken spirit, made the hardest decision of his life to let Rex go live with a volunteer family outside the city, one of those peaceful farmhouse types with lots of room to roam, a soft-spoken couple with 2 kids, and a promise to give Rex the calm life he deserved after a career of adrenaline and sirens. But in the years since, Nathan had never stopped feeling like he'd betrayed him, because the day they said goodbye, Rex barked once, confused, tugging toward the cruiser like he thought they were going on another case, another shift, another mission. But instead the leash changed hands and the car door closed, and that was it, a clean break, no ceremony, no salute, just a painful quiet. And so here he was now, nearly 4 years later, standing at the edge of a wide gravel driveway leading to a sun-drenched pasture, hoping for something he wasn't sure he had the right to hope for, unsure what he'd find, unsure if Rex would remember him, or if too much time and distance had passed, if the man who once shared a bulletproof vest with him now meant nothing but a faded scent from a different life. And as the screen door creaked open, a young boy no older than 8 pointed toward the trees and called, "He's by the old oak." And Nathan nodded, knees slightly trembling under the weight of emotion, walking slowly until he saw him, an older dog now, gray in the muzzle, moving slower, limping slightly, but still broad-shouldered and regal in his stance, sitting beneath the golden leaves like a sentinel guarding something invisible. And when Nathan said softly, "Rex," the ears flicked, but didn't lift. The dog looked, blinked, and then turned away, uninterested, like he saw just another stranger passing through. And Nathan's heart clenched, because he had prepared for everything except this, had imagined tearful recognition, tail wags, maybe even the famous lunge into his arms like they used to train for. He hadn't imagined indifference. hadn't imagined those eyes, once so sharp and locked onto his every move, now looking past him like he was a tree or a post or a fence post. And so he sat down right there in the leaves, not speaking again, just watching, just breathing, pulling from his jacket the old tennis ball Rex used to go nuts over, the one with a torn patch where a tooth once snagged too deep, and rolled it gently toward him, not saying a word. And Rex didn't flinch, just sniffed the air, then looked again, closer this time, stepping forward with hesitation, drawn by something that tugged at an old corner of his memory, a scent he hadn't cataloged in years. And he walked slowly, sniffing deeper, head low, ears tilted back, confused, searching, until finally his nose touched Nathan's hand and lingered, and something shifted. His eyes sharpened, just a touch. He tilted his head the way he always did when listening to a new command. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, his tail twitched once, twice, then stronger and stronger still, until it wagged with a force that made leaves scatter, and he barked a short, sharp, alert bark, the kind that used to mean target found. And before Nathan could brace himself, Rex pushed forward, burying his face into his chest with a soft whimper that rose into a high-pitched, urgent whine. And Nathan, overcome, wrapped his arms around him, burying his face into the thick fur and sobbing like a child, all the guilt and shame washing away in that flood of recognition, of reunion, of forgiveness without needing words. And they stayed like that for a long while, man and dog wrapped in a silence deeper than speech, until the family wandered over and gave them space. And over dinner that night, with the sun setting and Rex lying at Nathan's feet like he used to during stakeouts, the couple told stories of how Rex had never quite settled in, not completely, how he would patrol the property at night, how he refused to sleep indoors, until they built him a shelter outside with a roof and a light, how he'd bark at distant sirens even after months of silence, how he ignored their attempts to play fetch unless the ball had a particular scent. And as they spoke, Nathan realized something shattering. Rex hadn't forgotten him. He'd been waiting, just like he had waited behind that precinct desk for shift changes, waited at the cruiser door when suspects ran, waited for the signal to leap, to protect, to serve. He'd waited in a world that didn't understand the bond they had shared. But now, in that golden kitchen, Nathan made a promise to himself and to the dog resting beside him, a promise he wouldn't break again. He called in every favor he had left in the department, filed the paperwork, argued through the bureaucracy, and within weeks, Rex was officially readopted by his former partner, not as a tool of the force, not as a retired K-9 asset, but as family. And what happened next astonished even the most hardened officers back at the station, because Nathan brought Rex with him not for duty, but for healing, visiting schools and rehab centers and PTSD support groups. And people swore that when Rex looked at them, he saw everything, not just who they were, but what they'd survived, and he would press his head into their laps until their shoulders softened, until the walls came down. And one day, a fellow officer struggling after a violent encounter finally spoke his truth with Rex at his feet, saying, "I didn't think anyone would understand." And Nathan replied, "He always does." And from that moment on, Rex became a symbol not of power or protection, but of restoration, of reunion, of what it means to come back from silence and still be worthy of love. And the precinct held an honorary ceremony not long after, unveiling a plaque that read, K9 Rex, more than a partner, with his paw print cast in bronze, and Rex, old and slow but alert, stood beside Nathan in a custom-fitted vest that read retired, but always watching. And the crowd stood for him like he was royalty, because in a way he was. And even in his final days, when his hips gave out and the vet said it was time, Nathan lay beside him on the clinic floor and whispered stories into his ear about chases and sirens, about long drives and rainstorms, about quiet nights and loud victories. And when Rex took his last breath, his paw curled around Nathan's hand like it had so many times before. And Nathan knew in that moment that he hadn't just lost a dog, he had lost a part of his soul that only Rex had ever known. And to this day, when the wind picks up near that old precinct, when a siren echoes through an alleyway, when a tennis ball rolls into the gutter, Nathan swears he hears a bark carried faintly on the air and knows, without a doubt, that Rex is still watching, not guarding a suspect, but guarding him, just like he always did after Rex's passing. The days seemed longer, stretched by the aching absence of familiar paws across the hardwood floor, by the silence that settled where once there was the faint thump of a tail, or the rustle of fur shifting in sleep. And for Nathan Cole, now truly retired from the police force, a man who had spent decades chasing shadows and justice, grief came in quiet ways, subtle but relentless. He would find himself making 2 cups of coffee in the morning out of habit, opening the car door expecting a leap that would never come, reaching under the table to scratch ears that were no longer there. And though friends and colleagues offered their sympathies with well-meant words, he had a great life. You gave him everything. He's in a better place. None of it soothed the hollow carved out by a bond that had transcended language and time, a partnership forged in adrenaline and unconditional trust. And one evening, months after Rex's final goodbye, Nathan visited the station for a charity event. His first time back in uniform in a while, though this time it was ceremonial, the badge gleaming under indoor lights instead of the sun. And as he stood by the K9 units table, a young officer named Mia Hargrove approached, holding the leash of a nervous-looking Belgian Malinois with deep amber eyes and a skittish gait. And she said, "This is Juno. She's new, green, doesn't trust anyone but won't leave the shelter. They asked me to try handling her, but I think she's been through something." Nathan, looking down into the trembling creature's eyes, saw not just fear, but a raw kind of intelligence. The kind he had seen in Rex when they first met, when the dog had just failed 2 evaluations and was labeled too reactive. And he asked if he could kneel, and Mia nodded, watching as this old officer with a scar on his left temple and a limp in his step gently offered his hand, palm down, and waited, and Juno, at first frozen, inched forward, sniffed once, then again. And then did something no one expected. She placed her paw on his knee, slowly, deliberately, like a coded signal from an old language only few understood. And from that moment on, a new story began. One not about replacing Rex, because no soul can replace another, but about carrying forward what had been learned through years of service and heartbreak and trust. And Nathan agreed to foster Juno for a few weeks, just until she got used to human contact again, just until she stopped flinching at loud noises and shying from open doors. But weeks turned to months, and Juno began to follow him from room to room, resting by the fireplace like Rex once had, cocking her head at his voice, as if trying to decode its deeper meaning. And one rainy night, a thunderstorm cracking overhead, Juno woke howling from a dream, pacing the hall, tail tucked, trembling so violently that she knocked over a lamp. And Nathan, instinctively, grabbed his old police flashlight, flicked it on and off slowly, side to side, in the same motion K9 handlers used to initiate search protocol. And like a switch, Juno froze, turned toward him, and waited, and he gave the old command, seek, and she moved, controlled, measured, searching the house until she returned to him and sat, as if reporting in. And Nathan understood that she wasn't just a stray dog with fear issues. She had been trained, somewhere, somehow, by someone who either lost her or gave her up, or worse. And over the following weeks, they worked together, gently coaxing out her history through commands, her reactions to scent cues, even obstacle drills in the backyard. And Nathan began documenting everything, realizing that Juno had the capabilities of a top-tier working dog, but was burdened by trauma too complex to untangle alone. And he reached out to a national K9 registry, submitting DNA and training behavior reports. And weeks later, the call came. Juno had originally been part of a private security firm operating overseas, contracted for drug and human trafficking detection. But she had gone missing after a mission during a political riot, presumed stolen, or worse, and had somehow ended up stateside, passed through at least 2 illegal breeders before being dumped at a rural shelter in a cage too small for her frame. And the realization shook Nathan to his core, because behind those eyes wasn't just a dog, there was a survivor, a warrior with no battlefield left. And he knew then that their meeting hadn't been chance, that perhaps Rex's legacy had led her to him, and together they trained, not for combat, not for patrol, but for connection, visiting trauma therapy groups, teaching school kids about trust. And eventually, Juno became a certified PTSD support animal, not just for Nathan, but for dozens of veterans and first responders who had lost their way. And during one seminar in the city, Juno sat quietly as a teenage girl, barely able to speak from the weight of her own losses, leaned forward, and without prompting, Juno gently rested her head in the girl's lap, and the girl whispered, "She understands," and began to cry. And the room, filled with hardened adults, softened like snow under sun. And in that moment, Nathan knew that Rex hadn't truly left, that the work they had started was rippling outward in ways he could never have foreseen. And one day, back at home, he found an old journal he had written in during his rookie years, and tucked between the pages was a faded list titled "What Makes a Hero?" And the final bullet point, written in thick pencil, read, "The one who stays, even when the world doesn't understand them." And he looked down at Juno, now dozing peacefully at his feet, and whispered, "You stayed." And though she didn't open her eyes, her tail thumped once, and that night he dreamed of Rex not as he had been in his final days, but young again, strong, leaping through obstacle courses, tail high, barking with purpose. And in the dream, Juno stood beside him, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. And in the morning, Nathan opened his email to find a message from the department, a proposal to start a new K-9 unit dedicated to therapy and reintegration, not enforcement, built around what he and Juno had pioneered. And they wanted to name it Rex Division. And Nathan sat back, eyes wet, heart full, knowing that the story wasn't over. It was still being written, pawprint by pawprint, soul to soul, in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and hope. And that sometimes, even when the bond seems forgotten, even when the dog doesn't recognize you at first, what follows next can be more powerful than any recognition, a rediscovery of purpose, a return to love, and a howl that echoes forever across the valleys of memory months rolled into years. And what had begun as a chance encounter between a retired officer and a traumatized, forgotten dog evolved into something larger than either of them could have imagined. Nathan Cole, once a faceless name behind a badge and scars, and Juno, once a number in a crowded shelter log, became symbols in their small town and beyond of what it meant to heal, to believe again, and to rebuild trust when the world had shattered every reason for it. And the Rex Division, named after the dog, who had once saved a child from a burning building, and who had stood between Nathan and death more than once, grew into a program that stretched across county lines, pairing retired service dogs, trauma survivors, and disillusioned youth into something akin to family. And it wasn't flashy work. It wasn't about flashing lights or sirens, but quiet moments. A firefighter who hadn't spoken to his wife in months, now taking walks with a shepherd named Luna. A boy from a juvenile center finding comfort in brushing an old golden retriever's fur. while whispering secrets no one else knew. A young woman who lost everything in a car crash being gently woken from night terrors by Juno's soft nudges. And through all of this, Nathan, though slower now, older, walking with a cane not out of injury, but of age, remained a steady presence at the heart of it all. Always patient, always listening, his porch light forever on. And every evening, like ritual, he and Juno would sit outside watching the sky change from gold to indigo, and she would rest her head against his knee, just like Rex used to, though she never once tried to mimic him, because Juno was her own soul, and Nathan honored that. But the echoes of the past were never far, and one autumn evening, as the wind carried the scent of dry leaves and chimney smoke, Nathan got a call from an unfamiliar number. And when he answered, the voice on the other end hesitated, then said, "I think I knew your dog." And at first, Nathan thought they meant Rex, but the voice continued. Her name wasn't always Juno, we called her Sasha. And it was a woman named Alina, an ex-operative from the International K-9 unit, where Juno had once been trained before she was lost overseas. And Alina's voice cracked as she spoke, explaining that Sasha had been her partner during their last deployment in Eastern Europe, where she had sniffed out a tunnel used to smuggle children across borders. And during the chaos of a nighttime raid, Sasha was separated, presumed dead, and the team had mourned her like family. But now, thanks to Nathan's registry alerts and the microchip's long-lost data finally syncing with international databases, the match had been made, and Alina had wept when she saw the video of Juno comforting veterans in the therapy center. And she asked, "Can I see her?" And so days later, Alina arrived, carrying nothing but a backpack and trembling hands. And the moment she stepped onto the porch, Juno rose slowly, tail still, eyes cautious. And then, after a beat, she tilted her head the way she did when she was trying to remember something buried deep. And Alina, kneeling, whispered something in a language Nathan didn't understand, but knew was important. And Juno inched forward, sniffed her face, then suddenly lunged, not with fear, but with joy, her body vibrating, whining, circling her former handler, as if a forgotten chapter had leapt back to life. And Alina wrapped her arms around her and wept into her fur, repeating, I'm sorry. And Nathan, standing back, felt no jealousy or loss, only pride. And when Alina asked if Juno could return with her, Nathan smiled and said, "No need, she's already home, but you can stay." And Alina did for a few weeks at first, then longer, becoming part of the program, leading the expansion into cross-border collaborations, training new handlers to lead with heart, not command. And she and Nathan became close in a way that wasn't about romance, but shared grief and rebuilding two lives battered by loss, anchored by the same soul in a furred body. And Juno, for her part, continued to thrive, not as a servant, but as a bridge between worlds, visiting children's hospitals in her Rex Division vest, greeting strangers with calm strength, sometimes, when they passed by the photo wall in the center, Juno would stop in front of the framed picture of Rex, the dog with the dark muzzle and bright eyes, and sit for a moment, tail sweeping slowly, like she too felt the weight of the one who came before her. And on the 3rd anniversary of the Rex Division's founding, the mayor gave a speech not from a podium, but from the shelter floor where it all began. And she said, "This was built not from bricks or funding, but from loyalty and the kind of love we rarely understand until it's right in front of us." And behind her stood children, veterans, officers, teachers, and in front of her, Nathan and Juno, side by side, as always, and that night, as the celebration lights twinkled and stories were told around bonfires, Nathan stood alone under a tree Rex once loved, holding his old badge in his hand, and whispered, "We did it, old boy." And just then, Juno padded over, sat beside him, leaned her head gently against his leg, and looked up at the stars. And in the deep hush of the moment, it felt as though time folded a young rookie and a fresh K-9 partner watching the world with fire in their hearts, now echoed in this silver-haired man and his steadfast companion. And Nathan, feeling the years in his bones, but peace in his soul, knew that when his time came, there would be no regret, only the hope that his legacy, just like Rex's, just like Juno's, would ripple forward through every paw print on hospital floors, every child's smile, every gentle bark that reminded someone they were not alone. And eventually, when Juno passed, many seasons later, older than anyone expected, she was surrounded by people who loved her, her head resting in Nathan's lap, her final breath calm, as if she knew her mission was complete. And Nathan buried her beneath the same oak tree where Rex lay, placing between them a simple stone etched with the words, "Two hearts, one path, forever loyal." And though Nathan's heart broke all over again, he also felt something else, a quiet voice in the breeze, a memory, a sense that nothing was ever truly gone when love had run that deep. And in the years that followed, long after Nathan himself was gone, children visiting the Rex Division would hear the story of the dog who didn't recognize her former officer at first, but who, through healing, purpose, and an unshakable bond, helped rewrite a future for others just like her. And they would look at the statues in the courtyard, one of Rex midleap, one of Juno standing tall with her paw raised, and they would understand what real heroes look like, not in capes, but in fur, not in glory, but in unwavering presence. And thus, in every tale told, every bark echoed, and every hand extended toward a trembling muzzle, their story continued, not in the past, but in every soul that dares to believe in second chances.